in session here, and I'll turn it over to you to continue with the conversation.
Okay, so the last piece is the salary discussion. We cannot advertise without a salary, unfortunately. It just doesn't work that way. So the salary will get on our, be put on our website as well as the promotional information. So I provided several different comparisons. One is the Tri-County area of Oakland, Macomb, and then the one for, I'm not going to say it right, Washtenaw?
Washtenaw.
Ann Arbor, they do not have a posted salary yet, so I had Dr. Swift's salary put down there at the bottom. So the goal of these salary comps is try to find districts that average the same enrollment size as yours. So there's the Tri-County one, there's the Michigan one, which if you notice at the bottom, has the advertised salary for Grosse Pointe. It's my understanding Bloomfield Hills is perhaps going to be raising their advertised salary. And Forest Hills does not have a salary as when I looked on Thursday. I believe their application is going to go live in December, which I guess it clearly is December. So anytime they will be putting their advertised salary as well. And then I did a national search as well to try and find districts, again, with the average enrollment size close to Rochester. So that being said, my numbers came up in the 235 to 234, 235, 239. So very close. I do realize that is considerably less than what you were paying Dr. Shaner. So keep in mind the advertised salary is just that. It's just base. It's no benefits, no IRA, tax information, cell phone card, nothing. It's just base salary. I strongly encourage a range. I would say a range of 15,000, no more. So if you did,
I'm sorry, 15?
$15,000 gap.
A range.
Yep. So like if you said 150 to 165.
That's a narrow range. Okay.
Yeah.
Compared
but,
to what
but
I.
But if you have a too wide range, then you're going to get the whole spectrum of people applying, where we want to try and keep it tight. I would probably, maybe I'd go 20,000 for a range, but I wouldn't go any higher than that. So now is the time for discussion. And again, I realize it's lower than what you were paying before. I always like to say, depending on a person's stage of life, perhaps the back end benefits are more important than the front end. So maybe if you had somebody that was experienced, they would be happy to take a lower salary but a higher retirement. You just never know what people want. So those are all kinds of things to consider. So discuss amongst yourselves.
So I'll go
Trustee
first.
Weaver?
Because this is one that I think we looked at. I think we've seen data show, and again, this was reported out at the MASB meeting when they talked about this. We are seeing administrative, especially superintendent salaries rise. We're seeing it in public education. We're seeing it at higher ed. I personally think that we need to look at level setting and putting the actual costs in. I actually think the 235 is too high. I think we should be going even lower. I think we need to look out and identify truly what are the roles and responsibilities of a superintendent, what are their actual tasks in which they're doing, and benchmark that to other professionals in operations outside of a district. We need to get outside of just benchmarking to education, where the data supports the salaries are just rising when actually the results don't match the rise. So I don't think we're looking at the right data to actually give a good comparison. I think as we put our plan together and market it and show it, if we benchmark this to actual organizational leaders of actual businesses, we can actually justify bringing this down and bringing in a better set of talent. So again, I think it's too high.
Okay, that's interesting, because I would think it would be even higher in private sector. But Trustee Alsbach?
One of my concerns is the nature of individual characteristics of districts. I think that we might have to consider in our salary range the additional duties that a superintendent in our particular situation would have. So, and one of the questions I had is, if we do I was interested that you said 15,000 is a range. That seems a little small to me, but as I reflect, I would think a candidate might always place themselves at the top of that range, and if you're
Correct.
not thinking the top of that range. But if we didn't scope it in to $15,000, we actually could negotiate outside of that range when we get to
Oh,
a final
sure,
contract.
sure. If you had a
Or
unicorn.
either
yes.
high or low, either way.
Yes, correct. Or you can just say in the range of one number, if you want. And then and to clarify, when we post it, it will say, final salary to be determined by, hold on, let me look at this. Plus an excellent comprehensive benefit package, the final salary for the successful candidate will be negotiated and determined based upon proven experience, qualifications, and meeting board criteria. So there leaves that little wiggle room language, but yes.
And I know trustees Weaver point about bringing in industry experts, and I think there is value to synergy of bringing in other talents and other industries into the district. But I would imagine that would happen more at a cabinet level than at a superintendent level, because I know from my experience, education is an extremely nuanced, legislative-heavy industry that I really would want someone with experience in the field. While I agree with you, it's a valuable point, I just don't know if this is the position that expertise comes in the best spot.
So I'll just respond quickly to that. A district is made up of departments, so exactly what you described, the legislation stuff of that's where that department would cover that, and that's where you'd have experts in that department. The leader of an organization, which would be the superintendent, would be a quasi, think of it like a CEO, a plant manager. It's the person that runs the organization. They're responsible for the individual departments. There's no way that superintendent should be an expert in any of those fields. It'd be impossible for them to be an expert in any of those fields. They have to be the operational person, the one that has the ability to lead, manage, delegate, put the structures and processes in place. In those the cabinet level positions would be the ones that should be the subject matter experts of those positions. That's why, again, like I said, education is one department of our district. Yes, it's the biggest and most important department. That is where our experts should be, but that does not mean the superintendent would be an expert in education. That'd be irresponsible to expect them to be that way. It would not expect them to be a HR expert or a financial expert. They are a leader of the district. So that's where I think structurally is the difference. I would ask from our facilitators, can you guys benchmark and get us a data review of basically like-size organizations? Again, we roughly are $200 million a year budget. So again, if people are going to just take this term CEO and they go, oh yeah, Mary Barra makes millions of dollars, that's not a fair comparison. I'm talking about finding leaders of organizations roughly our size. As we heard again at our board table, people immediately said, I don't believe that. That's why I'm asking, can you guys actually benchmark data? I could do it, but no one's going to believe it if it comes from me, so that's why I prefer you guys to do it. Benchmark like-size organizations that are leaders in departments that would show that the salaries where those are at versus, again, just looking inside education. So we can actually use data and not just opinions to make decisions.
Trustee Weaver, I really do value your expertise and your industry experience, but I just want to clarify something you just said. It would be irresponsible for a superintendent to be an expert in education? Will you stand by that?
Absolutely, I was good.
Okay, thank you.
Because what I said was to expect that to be the superintendent's sole role. Again, that would say that how are they also an expert in all the other ones? So to cherry pick one sentence of the full part, yes, the leader of our district needs to lead the entire district, which means it is made up of many different departments. The top, and I've said this, and again, structurally we can't do it, my vision would be if we could do it utopian, the highest level educator would be basically a peer of the superintendent and report to the board. That, again, structurally, legally, we can't do that. So again, it is not to say that we should not have an education expert, but again, I don't think that fits when you define roles and responsibility is actually what you would define the superintendent's role as. That means we should have a chief education officer, which would be, again, a highly paid position, and that would be our actual education expert. That does not mean that has to be the same person as the superintendent, because the superintendent's role has to also oversee all the other departments. Trustee
Blake?
So I guess I was a little surprised at these numbers, that they're lower than I thought they would be, which is good because we don't want to spend more than we need to. But the way I look at this is I was trying to pick out what school districts that were kind of the same size as us, but also the same type of district that we are. But the reality is that we are bringing somebody into a challenging situation. And, they don't even know who their bosses are going to be in a few months. So I think we can't lowball people and expect to get really good people. The other thing is we have to look at the competition. So who's posting right now? According to this, Grosse Pointe is posting for 275 to 350, and that's less than half the size of our district. Bloomfield Hills it looks like they're jumping up to 275 to 300. That is about a third the size of our district. So I don't know how you expect somebody to come in at much lower for 3 times as big of a district. I was thinking, I'm just throw this out, like something like 225 to, 275. Maybe you take the top end down. Maybe that's too high. I'm not comfortable going over 300 like some of these places are, but I think we've got to pay a good amount to get good candidates.
Trustee Gupta?
I would just concur with Trustee Blake on all of those points that I think we have to look realistically at our competition and what the actual market is for this job at this time. And I think I do want to be very clear on the record that I do value educational experience in public education in a superintendent, and it's okay that other people might disagree with that, but that's my opinion. And I could support a range of 225 to 275.
I had a question. I know that range is much wider than what you're talking about, but I also look at the difference between someone who has not been a superintendent
Right.
before and someone who has been. And our past superintendent was here 10 years. The longer someone is in a district, their salary is going to go up. So while I would like to readjust that as well, I see the pros and cons
Yes,
of having
I
a
agree.
narrow, because if you said 250 to 260, if I am an assistant superintendent someplace and we like them, I'm thinking I'm getting 250, right? Or still in that range. And if I'm someone who's been a superintendent for 20 years, I'm still thinking I'm only getting 250 to 260. So that's why I can see a wider range in that regard. So I don't know if you have any additional feedback in that realm to help us as we're making this decision.
In the end, we'll go with what you want. That's just the parameters that we try to stick to, but it doesn't always work that way. And I can see the point if you're getting somebody, if you do the 250, just throwing this out there, if you do 250 to 260 and they're coming in as an assistant and haven't sat in that role before, that might be too high. We do ask on the application, I think, what they currently make, but we don't use that as a disqualifying characteristic, obviously. Somebody with the extensive experience, like you've indicated, is going to maybe want more. So I see it. I totally see it both ways. I see why we try to keep it tight, just because everybody is going to think that they qualify for the top. But I also see that if they haven't sat in the seat, that lower is, I understand. I could go either way.
I think if we do go with a wider range, putting the caveat directly behind the range that says depending on experience, because what this is really about is engaging a candidate and setting their expectations. And, if we go, and this is a bad example, 225 to 275, everybody gonna think, oh, of course,
Right.
I'm the 275 candidate.
Exactly.
But if it says depending on experience, then a reasonable candidate who's a cabinet member will go, oh yeah, I shouldn't be that high.
Right.
But another reasonable candidate that has a very long superintendent resume would go, yeah. So I think if we do a larger range, I would recommend that we put depending on experience so that we then have an explanation of that range.
Yep, and that is always on the posting.
I think we have to factor in also the competitive market that we're dealing
Yeah.
with right here. I mean, that's the big elephant in the room. As much as we'd like to say, we're a great district and someone will want to be here, and we should be saying that, we're looking, at least in Michigan, some comparable districts in terms of, not necessarily size, but, we know, for instance, Bloomfield Hills is just, they're on the struggle bus finding someone. And I don't want us to be in that position. So for us to see these numbers and not understand that we cannot come in and lowball it because it could reflect the quality of candidate that we get to apply. I mean, I think we have to factor those things in. Now, and also too, if we're gonna expand the scope, which we are, to a national search, you alluded to the fact that, Michigan has a unique set of circumstances in terms of the role that a superintendent walks into, especially a candidate that could be coming from out of the state. And, there's other challenges in that role in this state versus outside of this state in terms of legal requirements and things of that nature. So I think it's got to be a delicate balance. We cannot lowball this number and expect to get the kind of quality candidates that we want to come to the table and actually apply.
I'm curious, when a post goes out, do you receive any feedback at all from a candidate who might say, I was interested, but that's too low? Or, or do you not really get any of that?
We really don't hear any of that because I think they see it and they do with it what they want. I have been in a situation where a candidate has gone so far as to interview for a position, not necessarily a superintendent position, but then all of a sudden says, well, the money's not good enough. Well, you knew what it was. Yeah, he's on my list. But we really haven't received pushback because they see what it is. They'll do their research. They'll determine, is it right for us? Obviously there's moving expenses and all those little variables that go into it that perhaps is more of an issue to someone than that can be a big issue just in and of itself.
Well, and I guess I didn't also concur with what Trustee Blake said in terms of, we're having a major election in '24.
Yes, yeah.
And we don't know what that outcome will be.
Correct.
So I think that's another factor that candidates will be considering. And also, it doesn't take rocket science. Someone can pull up our board meetings and see that they are quite contentious.
And they will
So-
watch.
And of course they will, and they should.
Yes.
If they're interested in being a serious candidate, they need to know what they're walking into. So again, that's why I think we need to be very mindful of lowballing this number.
Yeah, and I would agree, any candidate, regardless of what district it is, and I'm not putting you out there as the only district, but any good candidate is going to do their research on the district, on the board, on the elections, watch the meetings if they're available to watch, go to meetings if they can. I've had candidates before where they come in, nobody knows who they are, and they're sitting there watching. I am not going to lie, the fact that you have a majority of board members up, whether you elect to run or not, is going to be a big issue because, they're going to be seated. The new candidate will come in July, and it could be, and that's not a good thing. The timing is just really bad. I'm not going to lie. But that's an issue, and candidates are going to be looking at that, and it could be a deterrent.
So I'm concerned by this conversation a little bit that we're talking about, again, dollars and cents and putting it against subject things. So it's almost like I'm hearing, because we have an election, we pay more. Like, that's not realistic.
No, I don't think.
Hold on. I didn't interrupt anybody else when you guys were making your opinions. Let me finish my statement. Gee. So the premise behind that is where I started. Can we get a better data set that shows us this comparison and the comparison outside? So we are looking at data, not opinions, of leadership standpoint. If the idea is districts are struggling to find candidates, but again, as I've talked to, and I've talked to trustees that have been involved with the Bloomfield one, instead of, if we're having a position where we have basically a shallow talent pool where everyone's competing for the same people, the idea of just throwing more money at a shallow talent pool to get people from that pool doesn't make sense to me. Why aren't we expanding the pool? So that says, yes, look for more outside candidates. So again, let's level set where we're at. What are the actual roles and responsibilities? What are we asking them to do? Compare those same sets, which again, the leader of a superintendent is to run an organization that has multiple departments within it, to be responsible for the operations, the processes, the financials, and the implement of district policy. That is really their role and responsibility. Again, so let's walk it back, but that idea of, because we have these things that are out there, yeah, you're right, to be perfectly honest, having a board where there's actually dialogue, where there's actually some debate, where having someone that's used to working in an environment, which again, the professional world is, where they have to understand that there's questions they have to answer, there is going to be rigorous debate at times, is a good thing. We're seeing predominantly in education, that's not something that a lot of the leadership is accustomed to and are very, bothered by it. But that's the new reality, that yes, those questions are going to come from the professional world, and we need to start treating our district like a profession. And that means that leadership position has to embrace that. So I would like to see data to compare where we're at. Again, I'll be the only one that continues to say these numbers are too high, and if the answer is we can only find a candidate by throwing more money at it into the same shallow talent pool that every other district's chasing, I think we're doing it wrong.
Trustee Blake.
I guess I'm not understanding what data set that Trustee Weaver's looking for, or let me finish and then you can answer. I'm not understanding what type of people you're looking for that is, if the salaries for people that are doing the job that we're looking to hire someone to do are irrelevant. I don't know what type of data is relevant. And for these numbers, I don't know, even if you go to private industry, what kind of people are working at a CEO level role that are making like in the lower than $200,000. I mean, this is like second year associate salary at a good law firm. This is not CEO level salary. So this is a lot of money. I'm not saying this is not a lot of money. I mean, it is, but this is a big, important role. I just am not sure what other data, and now I'll hear the answer of what other data set that we're looking for that would be more appropriate than this data set.
So as I said earlier, it would be looking at organizations that are like size, which are, again, an operation of around $200 million, in which someone is leading an organization of multi-departments. That's why I also said if we just throw out the term CEO, that's not relevant, because again, people will immediately think of people like Mary Barra. So that's obviously not the data set. The data set would be operational leaders of organizations around $200 million budget, which is what our budget is. It would be of multi-department, which is what our organization is, where they are responsible for operations, process, finance, and implementation of policy. In our case, it would be district policy. That's a data set that I think could be easily obtained. We have multiple, again, we are an area that has lots of industries and organizations that would fit that model. And I think we would see, then we could verify, instead of having to be our subjective opinions of what we think that is, it would be a data set just like this, where you could say, this is what education is at for people doing it. This is what the private sector is at for doing it. And let's just look at the data and see where it falls.
Trustee Ennis.
So I guess I just want to qualify, when you're talking about those industries, you're talking about a private industry versus a public domain, a publicly run, government-funded entity. Is that the point you're making?
Yes.
Okay.
Your source of
So-
your source of funding doesn't change organizational structure.
So the point.
No, it doesn't.
The point I'd like to ask is,
No, it doesn't.
from the consultant that we've hired for their expertise, in past searches, has this been a request? And if so, is that typically included in the scope of what you provide? If not, are we looking at additional cost in order to provide that? Because, quite frankly, Trustee Weaver, if you are keen on knowing this information and it's not covered in the scope, and we weren't informed that that was supposed to be the requirement, then I say you bring the information forward. You do the work.
Sorry. No, we have not been asked to do that information before. We do our salary comps just as this for every other district or every other search that we do.
One follow-up question then would be, how typical is it that a public education institution, K through 12, hires an individual from the private sector into public education in this role?
It's not very often. Every now and then it happens. I know there was a district in New York that hired somebody that years ago had been in the education field and then came back in from the private sector. For whatever reason, he only stayed 18 months. I don't know if that was on him or on them, but I can't think of a non-traditional candidate, what we would call a non-traditional, that we have placed. And I've been here 7 years, and I think that was the only candidate.
So my suggestion would be, because this is the salary, while, I mean, we would like to have it, but it gets emailed out on the 18th, right?
Correct.
January 18th. So I would suggest that we make a decision based on the information we have right now, and that, Trustee Weaver, if you want to find some comparables, 2,000 employees, if you want to use that $200+ million budget, maybe you can provide some specifics to us in the area that justify some sort of different salary, and that's something then that we could consider and make last-minute updates at our January 16th meeting.
I will be happy to do that. I just, again, thought potentially it coming from another source would make you guys believe it a little bit more, but I'll be happy to do that.
Well, as long as the specifics are there.
I'll be happy to do it.
So having said that, we still need to come up with a salary range. And Trustee Blake had suggested 225 to 275. I'm looking at both the Tri-County area, which has some that are lower than that range, as well as some of the searches that we know are available that are significantly higher than that. So just looking for more input on whether we like that 225 to 275, or we think it should be something different.
And I'm not married to that number.
Yeah.
That was just something I threw
I know,
out.
you
for
threw it out
discussion.
as a starting point.
I'll throw out my starting point would be 175 to 225.
Okay? Anyone else have?
What was the one you just said?
Trustee Blake had said 225 to 275, which I have to say is kind of where I was coming into this, but I also know that we have, other boards that are recruiting at the same time in the same area. Trustee Annis or Gupta, or Alsbach, any thoughts?
I would concur with Trustee Blake's proposal. The 225 to 275 range gives us a lot of area to work within, depending on level of experience coming in, and it's competitive according to this data in most cases. But if we find a candidate who's a unicorn going either direction, we can negotiate that.
I'd also take suggestions from our consultant, what you think.
Big sigh, right? I'm agreeable to the 50,000 gap. It's not my favorite. I would probably be happier with something 240 to 275.
Or I was going to say 225 to 250. Again, knowing that the salary is negotiable, that's within a range. It doesn't say that those are the end polls. That's the least amount and that's the most amount. It's a range within that, but it's also negotiated based on the person's experience, their credentials. A lot of other factors come into consideration.
I'm just going to ask, if that is how superintendent candidates look at it, because if I saw 225 to 250, I would think the salary is going to be between those two endpoints. There may be things outside of base salary that I can negotiate, but that the salary is going to be in that range dependent upon it, versus looking at it and going, oh, it says to 250, I want 275, but I have a lot of experience, so I can I'll be able to get there. That's my concern
Yeah.
with that piece.
And I respect what Sheila's saying, but I would agree. But I think they're going to want to see it
Yeah.
there.
I
in
mean,
print.
and given the public space that we're in, I think it needs to have a cap. I mean, we have to publicly make sure that's known.
If we want to bring it in tighter, maybe we do like 240 to 260 or something like that.
I will just say that while I look at what's inside, the ones listed for similar size, there are many that are below 240 who are excellent superintendents. Do you know what I mean? So when I think about bringing in potentially someone who has not been a superintendent before, are we going to say, okay, yep, you're worth, more than all these others that are in the area at 240?
Well, then that brings us back to the
It
broader
does,
range
it
again.
does. I have to say, I'm more for the broader range, just, I apologize for, only because I think about it from who our candidate pool might be. And because I keep hearing over and over again, the shortage of superintendents with existing experience, when it's more narrow, I think, of course, we're going to choose then someone who has superintendent experience, but that may not allow us. And if it's someone who has been a deputy superintendent or an assistant superintendent someplace, that we're willing to take, to a degree, a risk on, right? But then I would think they would be at the lower end. So that's, my rationale for the wider range is because I think the candidates that we receive may be very vast. And just because someone hasn't been a superintendent doesn't mean they won't be a phenomenal one, but it also means they don't have that experience, and there will be some, growth and learning that occurs during that.
And-
Trustee Gupta?
Just a question. Remind me, what is the downside of having that broader range?
Well, most people are going to think that they want the upper range. Yeah. Which is the case with anybody. But I think, the board is perceptive enough and smart enough to know that if somebody's coming in and they haven't sat in the seat, then they shouldn't expect the top end. And candidates are pretty perceptive too. They're going to know, okay, well, the top is 275. I think I'm worth 230. And a lot of it might depend on what they're currently making. But that's not an apple and orange thing, because they could be making 250 in a district the size of, I don't know, Austin, Dallas, Houston, wherever, and the number might not qualify here. So I get it. I get it both ways.
Yes, because you could have a superintendent that's in a school district of 6,000 or 5,000. No, the light doesn't go on. I pushed
It doesn't. I don't see it either.
Okay.
I don't see a green light either.
Yeah. You could have a superintendent who's coming into a district, now it's on, I can hear it, thank you, that it's 5,000 or 6,000 students coming into a district now that's 3 times that. And so the superintendent may be making 220 or 230 in that smaller district, coming into a larger district and then expecting, because of the additional workload, responsibilities, et cetera, would be expecting more than what they're currently making. So that would allow for that flexibility.
Trustee Blake?
I just wanted to say, I understand and acknowledge, I think, part of Trustee Weaver's point about kind of the inflation of these salaries, how they're going up higher, and do we want that? And when you compare a superintendent's salary to a teacher's salary or whatever, but I just don't think we can single-handedly reset the wage scale on our own. And the reality is we're competing with these other people, so.
Trustee Weaver?
So 2 points now. So on that one specifically, I'll address, someone has to start resetting it. Some board has to make financially responsible decisions. And again, to do stuff just because it's always been done that way is a really bad philosophy to follow. Asking, looking outside the box, trying different things to say, and again, I start with what we're talking about is just seeking applications, is to try and cast a wider net to then interview people and see where they stand and see what they bring to the table. I don't see what the downside is. So that part of how do you stop the inflation of salaries is, well, some elected board has to decide to stop allowing them to be inflated and make decisions that stop that. So the other part is going back to how we talked about the applications. We can very standard on application process, especially for salary leadership positions in a lot of industries. You put in what your expected salary is, so that again, when people apply, and again, if we have a range, they put in their range. So again, to that point, it'll let us see if everyone thinks they're at the top. And again, to go back to a perfect example, if I have someone with experience that thinks they're at the top, and I have someone with no experience that thinks they're at the top, that's a deciding factor, where they see themselves. So that could easily be part of the application process. So we said, submit your resume, submit your cover letter, put in your estimated, here's the range. What do you expect to get paid? So we have that data set. That from an HR standpoint is very standard in private sector. There's no reason being a public school would not allow us to ask that question.
I was going to ask, I mean, is that a possibility to put that on the application? It has their current base salary, but then asking to include their expected salary?
A candidate might be hesitant in answering that question because it would impact their viability of consideration.
It
Well, I mean, I
100%
think-
does. I mean, that's the point. That's what you're looking for. Again, I've had to fill them out when I apply for salary positions. That's exactly what it's designed for. You want to see where people see themselves. So
But I guess I'm just saying it in conjunction with having a range on there as well. But have you ever done that or seen that?
So even though we ask for the annual base salary, some people won't fill that in. They just don't, because it's not a requirement that they do. Our template is not set up that way. I don't think I can add another box, but I think I can change the wording, because another box would be a hard code that's somebody else that does that. I mean, if you want, I could say annual base salary including annuity, and then maybe what are you expecting to make? But again, if you don't like their answer, I don't want them being disqualified because you don't like their answer. I mean, if there's, you know what I mean? If you want it addressed in the cover letter, I can certainly put that in our information that says, what, for a role of this kind with a district of this size, what would you expect? I mean, there's just so many doors that are opening with all this.
Okay, so let's go back to just the range. So, Trustee Alsbach?
I think Trustee Weaver has a very good point about wanting to know where you see them. However, I think you're placing it in the wrong spot in the conversation. In my mind, that is further into the conversation than the opening application, because in the opening application, we're interested in the characteristics, what they bring to the table, how they represent themselves. But we're more to the nitty-gritty when that question comes up in my mind. So I would be concerned about us narrowing the talent pool, because we want to have as broad of a talent pool outside of industry as possible, so that we not create narrowing situations at the entrance to this process. I agree that we need to narrow those down as we go through the process, but I just think that putting in those gates that early would not broaden our talent pool.
But just as we said with the certification one, it's not an immediate disqualifier. It's just a data point. It's simply a data point. And again, in industry, it's very standard practice. So the fact, again, in this industry, it's not standard practice, well, maybe is the question of why isn't it? And again, there's no reason for us not to adopt a good standard practice in other industries, which again is simply to say, here's the range. What do you expect to get paid? And yes, it is 100% designed not to immediately disqualify, but to give the people accepting application, recruiters, the ability to see the data set and just be able to compare it. It's just a simple data point, no different than any other question on this application. And yes, all the questions on the application, well, let me take that back because I'll be taken out of context. Questions on applications are designed to create the data set to which, yes, you will eliminate people. It's not to say it, but to the point, it's not required it automatically eliminates you, because again, it's not a requirement that you have this or that. It's just saying, give us that data point. What do you expect to get paid? And the application process, I think, would be the right place to place it because, again, that is very standard in industry.
Have you ever seen it, like, could you replace this first question of do you speak another language other than English? Because that might be on their resume, I'm guessing, where you could put something there that would ask,
I can add a number 4.
oh, instead of the speaking fluently, you couldn't, because,
I think that's a hard code on ours, but I could add a question number 4 on there.
but what, does it allow something other than a yes, no?
Does it allow for a text box?
I think I can put a text, I can find someplace to put a text box. Go ahead, continue.
For the range.
So what kind of, if we were to do this, what kind of wording would we have? Just, for, what is your expected salary for this position or expected salary range for this position?
But you can tell, if you give me a day, I can get you the exact wording that we use at work. It's very, it's something like that, but I can get you the exact wording. That's very clean. It's just, I think it's expected salary, something like that. But I want to get you the exact quote. But it's very straightforward.
I think,
You're on.
You were on. You just turned on. Yeah.
I think to be clear, is it the base salary, or are you talking about the salary including benefits and, so I think, and annuities, all of that? I think that needs to be specified, yeah.
Yeah. And I think, again, to your point, we can just base it with, on the, whatever that range is. It's within that range. So, yes, I agree with you. We can make it very, very clean.
All right, so is there anyone opposed to adding, if they, assuming they can, a number 4 that would request that information and we'll work on wording? Okay, so I think we're, we'll, if we can, we would like to add something that asks what their expected range would be.
Okay, I'll take a look on our end and see what I can do.
Are you asking for expected range or expected base salary? 'Cause I
Well,
think
that's, we're going to
different.
we're going to work on the wording and, make a, so it's clear in the wording of it.
Thank you.
Good thing he's cheap. Yeah, and I'm not, I'll figure it out, because if it's a hard code, he's not gonna wanna do it, because we try to keep the same template for every one, and so it makes it much more difficult, but we'll figure something out.
Well, worst scenario, couldn't we just include in the description of the cover letter, please include this
Yes.
information?
Yes. Or I could stick it with the annual base, just add a line or something there that says what is your expected base, and,
Whatever the wording is that we
yeah,
get.
yep. So we'll figure something out, it's just a matter of where it'll be. Okay, I have two remaining questions, and that's it. Oh, that's right.
We have not
Sorry.
determined the salary range.
I'd already moved on.
So at this point, I'll just propose the 225 to 275. I know that trustee Weaver believes that's too high, but for the remaining board members. Okay.
I'm fine with that.
So I think we'll do the 225 to 275 with the possibility that depending on what trustee Weaver finds from a comparison, that there could potentially be a change to that, but that's our expected right now.
Okay, I won't put it on our website, I'll just put it on my notes as something that you will get back to me with a final number.
Thanks.
Sure.